So let's start with Tim Ballard. Some of you might not even know who that is. So, The Sound of Freedom, that movie that made a ton of money. It was a surprise sleeper hit at the box office, and it tells the heavily fictionalized, and I think that's one thing that some of you aren't getting from the outset, a heavily fictionalized story of Tim Ballard. Tim Ballard, a devout, supposedly devout Mormon. This isn't going to be an anti-Mormon thing, but it's gonna figure in later, this Mormon aspect. Supposedly devout Mormon, the big family, and a long-term supportive wife and all that, who used to work for. Claims to have used to work for Homeland Security, the U.S. Homeland Security Department, and the CIA. So Tim Ballard got interested, claims that during this time working for the government that he became really interested in and obsessed with the crime of childhood sex trafficking, which I think we all agree is like the worst thing you could imagine, right? Worst crime you could imagine. And so he founded this organization, Operation Underground Railroad, and I believe is the name of it, and I'm blanking on it, but I think that's it. OUR is the acronym. And he founded this organization, and he claims that he went on a lot of undercover missions, such as we see depicted in that film, The Sound of Freedom, to free children enslaved in sex trafficking, enslaved in these horrible situations. And so anyway, I knew about none of this, but I had heard about The Sound of Freedom, and I had heard that it was causing a bit of a political ruckus. Sorry, I'll try to stay out of that light there. I had heard and read that it was causing, this summer, that it was causing a political ruckus and a kind of a ruckus in the entertainment industry because for so long the studios were resistant to making the film or distributing the film, and it was being produced by Mel Gibson, a lot of people have a problem with, and controversial and all of that. And basically what happened is the film became a huge hit, partly because it was heavily politicized then by people on the right. And look, I've told you all before, politically speaking, I'm center or right of center. So when I say things like this, when I talk about the right, understand that I'm coming at it not from an unfriendly perspective, but I'm just trying to be truthful about what I see. This was a film that people on the right really supported this summer and kind of turned it into like a cultural lightning rod, where it was like, you had people on the left claiming that it was some kind of a QAnon film and, bizarre paranoid fantasy delusions and things like that, which I definitely didn't agree with that perception. And then people on the right claiming that this was a film that had been suppressed by the leftist Hollywood institutions, and that it needed, the only way it was going to get seen or really give a voice to these children depicted in the film is if audiences really got behind it and went to the theater. In fact, I went to the only reason that I ended up going was because it was because my mom, who is super conservative, and her fiance super conservative politically, they had seen something about it on some conservative show that they watched or listened to, and so they were there for purely political reasons. And so we watched the show, the film, and at the end of the film, after the film is over, Jim Caviezel, the star, the guy who plays Tim Ballard, he actually comes on the screen and asks people to get out their phones and to buy someone else's ticket, which basically means send money to the filmmakers, who then claimed that they were going to then buy this tickets to see the movie for people who can't afford it. Now, I'm not saying that's not true or that didn't happen. I'm just saying it all sounds kind of complicated. And whatever. But again, I'm not saying there was any kind of malfeasance. I'm just saying it's a little odd. All right. So point is, though, this film became a huge cultural lightning rod, and I think this is one reason maybe why a number of people are resistant to the idea that maybe this guy actually, Tim Ballard, is sleazy and did do sleazy stuff and did lie about stuff and what have you, is because it's so political for people, and because there's also the thing about children. Oh, this man was saving children, who can't get behind that. Then people think, well, this must be a political hit job, this Me Too stuff and these lawsuits and all of that must be a political hit job. And maybe it is. But I wanted to say a few things and explain why my feeling, and again, it's open to revision or what have you, and I'm not saying anyone needs to make any decisions on this based on my feeling. But my feeling is that I am concerned, and I see issues here, and that point to maybe Tim Ballard being guilty or being in the wrong. So let me just start off by saying, regardless of whether he did shady stuff or he didn't, first of all, you should understand that that movie is highly fictionalized, highly, highly fictionalized. This guy, Tim Ballard, was never out in the jungles risking, his life, like going, like we see toward the end of that film. Sorry to give away the ending, but where he basically goes on this one man, special forces type mission, posing as a medical guy, a doctor, to try to save this girl who's been taken by sex traffickers. Like, none of that happened. And that is actually one of the things that's brought up in this lawsuit. And I'll be interested to see when this does go to court. If it does go to court, if it doesn't settle, I'll be interested to see the truth that comes out about his organization and what they were up to and what they weren't up to, because it's alleged in these lawsuits and by detractors of Tim Ballard, critics of Tim Ballard, that basically these missions to save children were, for the most part, fancy vacation junkets where mostly wealthy men would sort of drop into these missions, these third world countries, and then would get all this positive press coverage, about being these heroes who've liberated these kids, and claims are made in this lawsuit about how everybody traveled first class, again, based on, this is donations, at times like bake sales and things like that, funding this guy's activities, and he's traveling first class, and he's staying at 5-star hotels, and he's going to a lot of strip clubs and massage parlors, and the lawsuits allege that he basically used his organization and his supposed mission as a way to induce attractive women to do things with him physically and sexually that they would not otherwise do, by claiming it was a part of the operation and what he called the couple's ruse. Meaning that, according to Ballard, he and the women who posed as his wife or as his girlfriend, they needed to maintain the illusion that they were in a genuine sexual relationship, and that is why, therefore, Tim Ballard and some of these other men wouldn't be able to engage in sexual activity with these kids and these minors, these underage people, because they could say, oh, well, look, that's my wife or my girlfriend over there. Now, I'm not saying, I'm not an expert on sex trafficking or sex trafficking rescue operations or what have you, and so I'm not saying that there's no such thing as a couple's ruse or that that's totally crazy or what have you. I'm just saying, though, that sort of thing, that couple's ruse idea, is that creates a very convenient umbrella under which a lot of shady activities could be hidden on Tim Ballard's part. And no, I'm not saying, and I know it could be the other way, it could be totally legit and people could be twisting this, and I understand lawsuits, suing a lot of people for money. I get it, and again, I'm not saying I think he's guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt or that I should be adjudicating any of this, okay? But I have read the lawsuits. I've been paying attention to this now for several months and listening to both sides and so forth, and I just think that I'm definitely concerned, and it looks shady to me. So it's alleged in this lawsuit that Tim Ballard, once he would in Utah, in Salt Lake City, once he would recruit women to join his organization and to agree to go on these missions, that he would train them, that they would then take part in an extensive multi-week or multi-month training period, and that training involved, according to them, Tim Ballard working on their sexual chemistry, because according to them, and again, all this is according to the suit, but that he said that these missions being successful depended on them having, he and these other women having excellent and genuine sexual chemistry. And so in order to work on their sexual chemistry, yes, so I'm sorry, the Aftermathone says, so you're saying he used the operation as a front. Yeah, basically. So gonna get a little bit further in this, but yes, basically that's what's alleged, or at least as a front or a partial front. And to me, the whole thing kind of looks illegitimate. But continuing, and so he would tell, and so in order to train these women and to get their sexual chemistry where he claimed it needed to be, for a period of weeks or months, he would take them to, they would go to all these different strip clubs and massage parlor type places in around Salt Lake City, and they would, and he would get drunk. He got drunk a lot. Apparently missed one of his flights, his business flights at one point, because he was so drunk. And of course, getting drunk's not a crime, but he was open about taking ketamine. It's alleged in the lawsuit that he brought his son to a strip club, and that the son was doing drugs in front of him too, and without Tim Ballard's wife's knowledge. Anyway, and but apparently, like, he would take these women to these different strip clubs and would get lap dances and massages, and would like do all of this sexualized stuff with them and with others in front of them, and would say that we're doing this to train our sexual chemistry. Now, again, these could be lies. This could be something that these women, this lawsuit, are completely distorting and all of that. But I'm just saying that these are not your typical, ordinary, run-of-the-mill Me Too type allegations. And I've read a lot of BS Me Too lawsuits in the Marilyn Manson case, and in other cases where I could see, just by reading the lawsuits, I could see the inconsistencies, I could see the problems, I could see where they were taking stuff and distorting it and twisting it, and I just had a feeling that this is off. This one, I don't have that feeling, and again, it could be wrong, but to me, it seems like legit allegations. It seems like it's raising significant questions. So here's the other thing to keep in mind too, and there's other stuff in the lawsuit that I don't have time to get to. Like, there's a picture in the lawsuit. There's a picture that he sent to a woman with apparently what are fake tattoos, but like, you can see his entire body. He's laying in bed like this, a sexy pose, and you can see his entire body except for he's got tiny Speedos on, and then he's got an above the pube area tattoo, like right above his dick, which apparently was a temporary tattoo. I don't know. But he claimed that he would send these women pictures like this so that they could work on their sexual chemistry. And again, I don't know. Thunder Kitty 506 says, I live in Latin America. I have seen the cops dismantle sex traffic operations and never heard of this guy until the movie, not even about his organization. Well, here's the thing. Okay, this is what I was going to get to, is that aside from the sex allegations and the lawsuit, there have been a lot of critiques recently of this guy. Well, recently, like going for months now, about the fact that his organization might be just completely illegitimate and just might be a sham. Y'all, it is so common. It is so common. I hate to say this, and I hate that it's true, but it is so common for these organizations, these types of humanitarian organizations, to basically be scams, or just like one step beyond beneath a scam. And you have a lot of people, a lot of narcissistic people with a lot of charisma, who know how to tug on the heartstrings and who know how to attach themselves to very heart-rending, tear-provoking causes, and get the money to flow in, and also be able to do things under the radar that they wouldn't otherwise get away with, right? And here's the thing, y'all. This is something else. This is under the radar behavior, all right? What have I been saying for 2.5 years about these rock stars and stuff? I say, look, if you date Marilyn Manson, you should expect a certain kind of edgy relationship. Now, as it turns out Marilyn Manson, it seems like, was a nice guy, treated women with kindness and what have you. But I'm just saying, like, what I've been saying is, or if you go into a back room with Till Lindemann in the middle of a concert and he wants to have sex with you, can you really be that surprised? So, like, what I've been saying, or Russell Brand, I said you could see Russell Brand coming a mile away. What's the deal here? And so, like with these other cases, what I've tried to emphasize is that these guys, whatever was going on there, it was not under the radar, in terms of the fact that we're dealing with these clearly like edgy personalities and highly sexualized men and what have you. This is very different, because we're dealing with someone who was not only trying to fly under the radar in every way possible, but was possibly using this cause and children and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as a kind of a shield. And so to me, there is something, if this guy, it turns out he's shady, and some of these things at least are true that are being alleged about him, to me that's a real problem. Now, it's been alleged that his organization itself, largely a sham. Like I said, he was not doing these types of missions that are depicted in The Sound of Freedom. And a lot of it just involved, it seemed like, doing a lot of nice first-class traveling and giving speeches and being on Trump's task force and all of this stuff. Like the glamorous part, the cool part of being of leading an organization like this, and also it sounds like doing a lot of engaging in a lot of sexualized behavior with women who were not his wife. Now, whether that was truly for a higher, better reason, or the liberation of children, or whether I think he was trying to get his sexual jollies off in various ways under the radar, but that's what's being alleged. Now, he had to step down from his organization that he had founded, the OUR, Operation Underground Railroad Organization. He stepped down from that several months ago, as it turns out, because that organization did its own investigation, and they concluded that he had engaged in misconduct. So understand that the women who are now suing, they did go to this organization internally, and they complained a while back about this man and about what they claim he was doing. And the organization did its own internalized investigation, and he stepped down, or he was forced to step down. And so then when he stepped down, Tim Ballard, he formed a new organization called SPEAR that basically is a kind of, as the lawsuit puts it, is a kind of a landing pad for him, because he had to leave the organization that he founded. And he had to leave it at just the time when this movie was becoming a breakout hit. So when this movie became a hit, then it was disclosed that he had just resigned. And so I don't know if that was several weeks before or months before, what have you, but it was fairly recent. And so it put him in this awkward position, and it put this organization in an awkward position, because here's this huge movie that's become this huge surprise sleeper hit, and is getting all of this acclaim, and is raking in hundreds of millions of dollars, and it turns out that the guy that the movie was about, who founded the organization, had to leave the organization, step down, because of claims that he was a scammer. So so it's interesting. Now, let me say a couple of other things, then I'm going to move on to talking about other stuff, other controversial stuff. But let me say a couple of other things. I understand that this thing has a political dimension. I understand that this guy was being looked at as the next senator from Utah. I understand that these allegations and what has happened put an abrupt end to his political career. I understand that for a while, this movie has been a very politically charged topic, and so forth. And so when people say to me, can't you see that this is just a political hit job? I understand political hit jobs, and like I've said before, I'm actually, generally speaking, politically, I'm a little right of center, depending on the issue or what have you, right? So I would be receptive to this idea, but I just don't think in this case that's actually what's going on here. And I'm not saying that this scandal is not being used for political ends. Yes, obviously, when this scandal broke, I'm sure that the people in the Democratic Party, the leaders of the Democratic Party in Utah, and whoever is running against, would have potentially been running against Tim Ballard, I'm sure they were rejoicing. And yes, they're going to try to get as much mileage as they can out of it, just like the other side would. Everybody in politics, for better or worse, they try to get as much mileage out of shit and out of other people's scandals as they can. But just because this is a politicized topic does not mean that this guy didn't do shady things. It does not mean that this guy didn't do shady things, or that he's not in the wrong. And if you're just now joining, we're talking about Tim Ballard. I'm about to get onto a different topic, but we're talking about Tim Ballard. It just came out today that he's being sued. He and a bunch of other people are being affiliated with him, and his organization are being sued by a number of women who claim that He basically is a scammer. He is not the sex anti-sex trafficking crusader that he claims to be, or at least he's not really been that effective. That he's mostly just used it as a way to bring in money. He has brought in millions of dollars to his own pocket to bring in money and also to engage in sexualized activity with women. Okay, who are not his wife. Anyway, I want to say one more thing, and this is a more personal level, and I'm not saying that this should hold weight with you or it shouldn't, okay, but I'm just saying, as they say, my truth, but I want to explain something. I grew up in the Baptist church, in the Southern Baptist church, and yeah, hi, hey Aaron, what's up? Yeah, we're talking about The Sound of Freedom and Tim Ballard. And by the way, if you're just now joining, I'm going to post this as soon as I'm finished with it. I'm going to post it on Instagram. So if you missed the first part, you can go back and watch it. I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church in East Texas. And if you are not American, then that might not mean much to you. But basically what that should code as is an extremely religious, extremely what I would say repressive background, and I went to church at times 3 times a week, was in the youth choir. I went on church mission trips. I went to Juarez, Mexico when I was in middle school, and I brought a number of children to Christ, as we like to say back then. And I didn't have sex until college. I didn't drink or anything in high school. Like I was one of these cliched, stereotypical, extremely religious, extremely sexually conservative people. And I was exposed a lot to an extremely religious, fundamentalist, devout, quote unquote, devout environment. I went to, it was considered kind of a mega church because it was so large for where I grew up. So the town that I grew up in had, when I was growing up, had around 85, 90,000 people who lived there. And the church that I went to had a roster of over 10,000 people. So if you think about it, it's kind of like that movie Footloose, where you've got that one church that kind of controls everything in the town. It sort of felt like that. And so, like, for instance, if you wanted to run for office in that county, then you needed to make sure that you got this church behind you. In fact, the most famous person to ever come out of my church, you want to know his name? Louis Gohmert. Does that mean anything to any of y'all? I actually grew up going over to Louis Gohmert's house a couple of times. My sister was extremely good friends with, hi Kylie Baker, you said I grew up Southern Baptist, I completely understand, yeah. My sister was really good friends actually with Louis Gohmert's, one of his daughters. And so anyway, if you don't know who that is, it's just a extremely conservative former member of Congress, really big in the Republican Party, famously said that there were demons loose in Washington, which that actually may be true. But anyway, so my point is that this guy, Louis Gohmert, he originally got started in politics because of this church that I went to. He was a lawyer, and frankly not a very successful one. He was a lawyer, and from what I hear, he was a lawyer, and he decided he'd had enough being sort of a mediocre, not so successful lawyer in town, and so he wanted to run for judge. Because if you're not very successful at one thing, of course you need to go for something that requires even more intelligence and effort. And again, some of you on the right, don't get upset. I've said I'm right of center politically, all right? So, but that doesn't mean that I can't criticize or make fun of politicians. Come on. So anyway, he decided he wanted to be a judge, and so he got the support of the church behind him and of the pastor. And that's the only way you can win anything in my city, in my county that I grew up in. And so he won, and then he got their support for him to run for the House of Representatives, and he won that. And so what did he do years later? He invited the pastor, the same pastor who had endorsed him from this church that I went to, he invited him to come to Washington and to give a prayer in front of, to do the weekly prayer in front of Congress, which is fine. That's fine. But what I'm trying to tell you here is the kind of environment I grew up in. So here's what I'm getting at. Freud understood very well, and many psychotherapists since him, that repression repression does not kill an urge or an emotion. In fact, it strengthens it, and also it can cause it to become perverse. What I'm saying is, if you have sexual urges, sexual desires, and you grow up in an environment that makes you feel that not only is the expression of those wrong, like you shouldn't have premarital sex, etc., but that even these feelings are wrong, and sexuality is dirty, and sexuality is to be feared. You grow up in an environment like that, and perhaps you add on, sort of a Mormon twist to it, which is the idea that, you should want to have as many children as possible, and that women should have, and I got this too in the Baptist church, women should have a more subservient role in the home and all of that, etc., etc. But here's what I'm trying to get at. Freud understood that repression actually intensifies the emotions and feelings and drives, and that it can even cause them to take on a sort of a perversity or a sort of a twisted aspect, okay? And I see someone who he seems bound and determined to promote himself as a hero. I see someone, and I see someone who has, who's a devout Mormon, claims to be a devout Mormon, and brags about his relationship with the president of the Mormon church, and he's got all of these kids, doesn't look like, it looks like he's really into that traditional thing, And one of the things that came out in the lawsuit, and this is something that to me it's too random to have been made up, to me it rings true, is that Tim Ballard uses a psychic. One of the tools that he uses is a supposed psychic. In the lawsuit, she's named, I believe, Rosanna, if I'm remembering correctly. And that one of the things that Tim Ballard liked to do was to take ketamine and to have these exchanges with this woman, these conversations where she claimed that she was speaking to a Mormon prophet. I'm sorry if it cut out. I'm sorry. Let me try this again. I was just saying that that Tim Ballard, that's one of the things that came out in the lawsuit, and to me it rings true. He would use the services of this friend of his who was a psychic. Her name was Rosanna or something, and he would take ketamine, and she would do these like psychic sort of readings. They would have these conversations where she claimed that she was talking to an old Mormon prophet, like a dead prophet from the past, Nephi or something like that. I just read the lawsuit, but I'm blanking on the names. And so she would talk to this Mormon prophet from the past, and that this Mormon prophet apparently said that Tim Ballard was supposed to be the first Mormon president of the United States one day, and not only that, but he was going to be the incarnation of the most important Mormon prophet who was to come, who would usher in the second coming of Christ or something like that, right? Here's my point. I don't know, that could be BS, but that story could be BS, but here's my point, is that Tim Ballard, this picture that I'm getting of him, it really resonates with me as the type of person that I grew up with, frankly, in the Southern Baptist Church, and that really very devout, fundamentalist environment, traditional environment, where you have men who have all these sexual urges, but also they have this idealized sort of narcissistic vision of themselves as on a mission from God, and they're going to save the world and all of that. And those two things, particularly because of the environment that they're in, the sort of distorted, hyper-religious environment they're in, hyper-fundamentalist environment they're in, with its repressiveness towards sex and fear of sex and all that, these two things are in conflict. They have these desires to save the world and to live for God and to be the next prophet of Mormonism or what have you, or and then on the other hand, they want some woman to suck their dick, right? And so these things, they don't always fit, right? And it causes cognitive dissonance. And so what I saw growing up in the Baptist church, I guess let me just get to the point, is that I feel like a number of the guys that claim to be the most devout in the Baptist church were actually the most perverse and the most kinky and the most sex obsessed. I mean, I didn't have sex with them because, I was a virgin then, but like the things that I would hear, that the way they would talk, the way that they seemed so fixated on sex in a way that like my non-religious guy friends weren't. And I saw also how a number of men in the church would use their position as a way to get closer to women, as a way to bring down those barriers. And I'll give you one example. It happened to my mom, and I hope she's okay with me telling this story. But my mom was a very, very beautiful woman. I mean, she still is, right? Very, very beautiful woman, and in her 40s. And she was the type of person that, like, if she was walking down the hallway, like, people would look. And she dressed, and it's not like she dressed in an outlandish or sexy way or whatever, but it was just, she was very beautiful. And she was a very devout Christian, still is, very devout Southern Baptist, went to church, a couple times a week or so, supported me in going to church a lot, being in the youth choir, all of that. And even to this day, she gets up in the morning and she reads the Bible for an hour every morning. So anyway, she and my dad were having problems, and which were his fault. But anyway, they were having problems, and they separated. And there was this assistant pastor at our church who was very insistent that my mom should come to him for counseling, because one of his functions in the church was to be the assistant pastor and then to counsel people in the church. And he was very, very insistent. My mom didn't want counseling from him, didn't ask him for it, but he was very, very insistent that she needed to come in for counseling. And she kept refusing him. And one night, after some kind of church event or something, he came up to her, and again, he was like trying to get her to do this private counseling with him, and this like private after hours counseling. And he told her, he said, I just couldn't believe that your husband left you or cheated on you or whatever. He said, because I've always thought you were just one of the most beautiful women that I've ever seen. And basically he was hitting on her. Now here's my point. I'm not saying that that's like some kind of horrible assault or anything like that, but I'm just saying I saw this scenario a lot in the church, particularly among very devout circles, where there were a number of men who were great guys and whatever and were genuine in what they were doing, but there were also a number of men who were not genuine, or if they were deeply conflicted. They were suffering from a real split because it seems like they were very hung up on sex and on like doing stuff under the table, or trying to do stuff under the table under the guise of helping people. So when I look at Tim Ballard, that is just, and I read about him, and even if I were to dismiss the lawsuit, which seems credible to me, that is the vibe that I get. One of these deeply, in some ways, repressed, hyper-religious, hyper-devout types that thinks that he's on a mission from God, and therefore, in this very narcissistic way, and therefore, because he's on this mission, he can do some of this sexually shady stuff, or what have you. And it's kind of like that Ravi Zacharias guy. Look up Ravi Zacharias. I'm serious. I'm going to get off here because actually I need to take a little break. I still want to come back and talk about Manson and talk about Rammstein. So I'll be back for another live in like 10 minutes or so. But if you want to look up Ravi Zacharias, it's an interesting story. All right. So that's my opinion on Tim Ballard. It's subject to revision, subject to change.